Okay, Pops, unfortunate news coming out of Japan, and Toyota Corporation, a company that they own, is accused of emissions scandals dating all the way back to 2003, Dad. This is not a good look for Toyota or for Hino Motors. What's going on here?
Apparently they've been falsifying some of their emissions records in regards to four different engines that they produce for some of the buses and trucks that they manufacture in Japan. They thought this issue only went back to like 2013. It turns out it goes as far back as 2003. So we're talking nearly 20 years of falsified emission data for these four engines that they utilize in some of their vehicles.
And this is not the first Japanese automaker to have kind of an emissions scandal of sorts. Mazda had previous emissions issues. Mitsubishi, even back in 2016 when there was pressure on Toyota and Hino, had emissions issues as well. With Hino Motors, there's 115,000 vehicles that are impacted by this. And ultimately, Dad, they've decided to stop selling the vehicles. They've got recalls on vehicles. There are a host of issues that come when you falsify emissions data. It's not a good look internationally. The U.S. government is upset. The Japanese government's upset, so on and so forth.
And it's not a good look internally. It turns out after doing investigations that the main reason that they ran into these situations is because engineers and those in positions of responsibility within the organization were afraid to mention to their superiors, the higher ups, that some of what they were asked to accomplish was not actually doable. There was so much pressure to perform that they were afraid if they spoke up and said that it wasn't something that they could accomplish, that they might end up losing their jobs. So instead of speaking truth to power, they kind of caved and just told those in power whatever it was they wanted to hear, and they falsified the documents to support it.
So Hino Motors put together a committee to essentially look into these claims that there was an emissions scandal in place. And the committee, which is lawyers and advisors, et cetera, the committee did not find evidence that executives outside the powertrain unit were aware of the misconduct. This comes from Reuters. The division requires high expertise, which hindered personnel changes and allowed misconduct to continue. Committee member Makoto Shimamoto said, quote, misconducts have been passed down within the unit, but there was no monitoring functions in other units, which is a major issue, he said. Even if there was no personnel movement within the organizations, these issues should have been found. Ogiso said the company had put quality, compliance, and talent development on the back burner as it sought to expand its scale and volume starting around the year 2000. As a result, numerical targets such as product development schedules and fuel efficiency were prioritized over working according to proper processes. That ultimately led to, in 2003, the beginning of this emissions scandal, which, as you said at the outset, had four different motors that Hino has produced, ultimately falsify emissions data globally. This is the same thing as what happened with VW Dieselgate. And I know I mentioned a couple moments ago, I mean, there are other Japanese automakers and other automakers in general that have struggled with this. In 2018, it was Mazda, Suzuki, and Yamaha. In Subaru and Nissan also were under scrutiny for this back in 2017. 2015 was obviously Dieselgate with VW.
Maybe, just maybe, this points to governments mandating certain emission standards that just aren't practical to reach, and so that manufacturers feel compelled, in order to reach these standards as set by these governments, to misstate the information in order to be able to continue selling vehicles.
I couldn't disagree more with your take there, Pops. This speaks to corporations wanting to line their pockets and invest as little as possible in having to meet stricter and stricter EPA or in general mileage standards globally. Dad, they want to take the quickest, fastest, easiest route out. This is not about what you can or can't do. This is about where you're investing. And I think we're seeing that even in cultures like Japan, where respect is of the utmost importance. Well, even there,
Yeah.
they're still having issues like these crop up.
I agree and disagree. I really do think the pressures to bear from governments, whether it be the U.S. government or European governments or even the Japanese government, I think it's setting goals that are not necessarily achievable in the time frame that these governments would like them to be. The governments want to show that they're trying to do something. The manufacturers are having a hard time figuring out how to actually accomplish it. And so rather than anybody admitting defeat, they're just falsifying the information. I think one plays into the other. I don't think either is blameless, but I think there's a certain cause and effect involved here as well.
And let's be clear, Toyota has put out a statement because, again, Toyota owns Hino Motors. It's a 50.1% controlling interest. Toyota has already submitted a public opinion on the matter and underlined that Hino must get, quote, to the bottom of the situation as soon as possible by taking preventative measures. I'm not quite sure what preventative measures you can take after something's been happening for 20 years. However, Toyota is taking the incident seriously, they say, and we should expect to hear more from them soon. This is the first that I'm aware of, Ted, the first emissions scandal tied back to Toyota. And again, let's be very clear, we're probably going to use a thumbnail and a video title that says Toyota emissions scandal. This is a Toyota emissions scandal because that's a company they own. This is Hino Motors,
Yes.
buses and trucks that they produce. It's still not a good look for Toyota Corporation or automakers in general.
Maybe they should get some of the folks from Carvana on board to show them how to do it.
To be very clear, Carvana does not have any emissions scandals, but they are very good at getting laws to be, kind of moved and mitigated and lawsuits dropped and things like that. Pops, thanks for your time as always.
Thank you, handsome.